Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our distracted driving webinar today. First, I would like to start with thanking Assurance. Our sponsor, Assurance, is among the largest and most awarded independent insurance brokers in the United States. A top 50 independent broker, Assurance places coverage for all lines of business and personal insurance, employee benefits, and retirement services. At its headquarters in Schaumburg, Illinois, where more than 480 insurance professionals minimize risk and maximize health for over 6,000 clients across the country. I'm going to leave it on this slide for a second just so you can see some tips we have for the webinar to get you through if you're having any problems. Okay, so my name is Jennifer Smith. I'm the CEO of StopDistractions.org. We're an organization made up of victims' families all across the country who have been impacted by distracted driving. We are the faces of distracted driving. We put a voice to this dangerous issue, and we just help to teach others to not drive distracted so they don't have to walk in our same shoes. How I got into this, it's a personal story, which many of us now have. This was my mom, Linda Doyle. She was 61 years old and lived in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. She had got a phone call one day that someone had some cat food they wanted to donate to the Humane Society, where she was their most dedicated volunteer. That phone call came in at 4:38 p.m. She decided she would go pick up this cat food and get back in time for dinner with her husband. She got in her car, proceeded to leave her neighborhood, and at that stoplight of her neighborhood where the light turned green, she started to proceed through the intersection. Now, my mom was one of those people that sat at a green light just to make sure it was clear, so I know she sat there and waited. Well, when she started going, she was passing the third lane of traffic, turning left, when, at that time, a 20-year-old driver who was talking on his cell phone ran the red light and T-boned her car at about 45 miles per hour. If you see that picture on the bottom, that is the seat that my mother was strapped in when he impacted her car. This driver had never had any parking tickets, no speeding tickets. He was the guy next door. He was a college student who volunteered to mow the lawns of the elderly in his neighborhood. He worked at his church. He still lived at home. He was a great student. He was the guy next door. He had been driving for less than a minute. He had been on the phone also for less than a minute, driving for less than a quarter of a mile when he ran that intersection light. He never saw the light, and he never even touched his brakes when he T-boned my mother's car. We then called it, as the newspapers then phrased it, death by cell phone. I was a real estate agent at this time, so I was always on my phone in the car. I had my headset on. I didn't text while driving back then yet. You know, only our kids did it back then. But I was always on my phone talking, and so was my mother. And so I started to look into the research on why she was gone if he was simply talking on the phone, and why didn't he see her? He never even touched his brakes. What caused this to happen? And I was really surprised to learn that distracted driving was much more than just texting. So I got into the research and I started looking, and I started learning about cognitive distraction. It's also called inattention blindness. And that is where our brain cannot do these two cognitively demanding tasks at the same time without one of them suffering in that process. Your brain doesn't do those two things at the same time. It's actually toggling back and forth. And so this slide is kind of a perfect interpretation of it. I say this is your brain on cell phones. The first slide, the picture, is when you are just driving alone, the part of your brain that is engaged in the task of driving. In this study, they used an MRI machine, and they weren't even having a full conversation when they looked at the second set, the driving while listening to sentences. These were simple yes or no questions and not even a very demanding conversation. And you can see how much less of the brain was engaged in the task of driving and pulled into that cognitive thinking. They say you can lose up to 37 to 15% less of your brain cognitive awareness of the task of driving when having that conversation. And there is no difference between hands-free and handheld. This is the eye scanning area. This is where our eyes typically scan when we're driving. We just do this naturally. The first picture is driving while not using your cell phone. You see how large that box is. You're going to see unexpected events as they come into the awareness of your eyes, so you can react to it. But while you add in a driver using a hands-free cell phone, you see how much smaller that box gets. So if a child is going to run out into the street to get a ball, you would not see them in time to react, where you're going to be able to drive that car, stop that car in order to not hit that child. This is another picture that depicts what our brains are actually seeing when we have inattention blindness. The picture on the left is what is in the normal driving environment, what you would see if you were just focused on driving. You see the cyclist, the pedestrians in the crosswalk, the pedestrians even on the side of the road, the man holding the stop sign. But when you're on the phone, again, hands-free or handheld, your brain is only processing about half of that information. And the problem is you think because you're looking that you're seeing. But as I said before, it doesn't matter where your hands are, it's where your head is. And if your brain isn't processing what you're looking at, then you don't even know what you need to react to. So many of you have probably noticed over the past few years that your car insurance rates keep getting higher, even if you're a perfect driver. Well, insurance companies are saying this is based on the number of distracted driving crashes they're seeing. They're seeing it in their claims data. They're seeing that crash claim frequency and severity is all getting worse, and they're blaming distracted driving. Some states, in Georgia, insurance rates went up 12.6% over a number of years. And the companies are saying there's a striking correlation of the rise of smartphones and these car crashes. So this is kind of my summary of why. This is cell phone industry data, and even this data stops at 2016, but you can see from 2014 there is a massive rise in data transmissions, and that is the problem with the smartphone and why we're seeing such a large range of crashes increasing. Now at the bottom, why I left this in here is you can see if you look down to SMS traffic, that's text messages. And you see in 2015, it's higher than in 2016. The amount of text messages are actually going down year after year, just like the minutes we're talking on the phone is also going down. And this is because of the rise of data. If anyone has a millennial or a teen or even younger, they don't text anymore. I have a 23-year-old and an 11-year-old. They Instagram, they Snapchat. The only people they are texting is their parents or grandparents, if even that. I mean, I even see adults now Snapchatting, and that's considered a data transmission, not a text message. And so the way we're using our phones is changing. Also, if you have a millennial, you also notice that they don't make phone calls like normal people have over the years. They video call each other. And so that, again, is also a data transmission. That would not be noticed in these stats as a cell phone call. I know some of these slides could be a little more difficult to see, but this is more cell phone industry data and just showing this is the more updated up to 2017. If you notice, there's about 400 million plus cell phones in this country alone. That's more cell phones than there are people. We average about 1.2 devices for every person in this country because, some people have a work phone and a personal phone. And again, it's the number of smartphones that is skyrocketing. In 2014, we were at about 50% penetration of the smartphone. Now we are at over 90% penetration. And that's when we've seen this extreme rise in crashes is with those smartphones because we can do so much with them. Also on the screen, you can see that data has exploded. It's 2,844% more data is now being transferred than in 2010. And then the bottom part of the slide is just showing that huge increase in data. And that is why I believe crashes are escalating. This is more of the same information, but just going longer into 2017. You see that strict rise in cell phone data transmissions. That is the cause of these crashes. It's because we're doing so much with our phones when we're driving, when we're not driving. Our phones are everything to us. They're our camera. They're our calendar. They're our email. You know, we shop on them. They're our way we get on the internet. Everything we do is through our cell phones now and those data transmissions. So much how we used our phones have changed. Like I said, mobile banking, health apps, finding entertainment. You know, you can run appliances from an app on your phone. You can watch your security cameras, your baby monitor. We shop, we browse the web. You name it, we can do it on our phones and at any given time. And this is my own analysis. When we started to see a big rise and increase in fatal crashes in 2014, you can directly correlate that with the rise in data traffic. You know, when I first started this work back in 2008, 2009, people used to say, oh, well, if cell phones were the problem, then why are we not seeing the rise in crashes with the rise of the cell phone? Because we were actually getting crashes down from 2010 on until 2014. Well, I believe it is because of the smartphone and the data traffic. And this slide shows you that correlation between the two. Other thing, AT&T does a study, a survey of their customers every year just to show us how the trends are changing. And if you look in 2015, you know, we were texting and emailing, surfing the net. And if you notice, all social media was individual: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We rarely took selfies and photos. Shooting a video was only 12% of the time. Snapchat was just starting. Video chats were just starting. But then you look at 2018, it already changed so much. We're snapping and viewing photos 64% when it was only 17% before. Accessing social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that was all lumped together. Watching and streaming videos at 36% and 31% shooting a video. We started playing games, if anyone remembers Pokemon Go. Video chat was already at 27% in 2018. Well, they just released their new information, and 7 in 10 drivers say their smartphone has become essential for them to get around. Watching videos and video chatting while driving has doubled compared to 2015. 62% of us keep our smartphones within easy reach while driving, and when we hear those notifications, we immediately go to grab it without even thinking. 30% of people who post to Twitter while driving do it all the time. 22% who access social networks while driving cite addiction as the reason why they're doing that. And I'm going to get a little more into that addiction factor later. And of those who shoot videos behind the wheel, 27% of them think they can do it safely while driving. There was a study done years ago by a communications major at the University of Michigan that he talked to college students about texting and Snapchatting, and they said, oh, I would never text while driving. That's dangerous. But for some reason, Snapchat just feels okay. If anyone doesn't know what Snapchat is, that's where, you know, you take a picture or a video and then add text on it and send it to your friends, and then it deletes within 24 hours or so. They think that's okay, but they would never text and drive. That word texting has become taken so literally between people. Even years ago, AT&T surveys asked parents, would you ever text while driving? Oh, no, I would never do that, but I do email. Is that worse? Is it the same? You know, it's all bad. This is interesting to also show our addiction to our phones. Given the choice, Americans would choose their phone over chocolate, their phone over dating, their phone over coffee, which I could never do, and their phone over beer. You know, our phones have become more important to us than many of the things we used to do in life. So why we can't stop checking our phone. You know, this story is from 2013, where we were just starting to see the changes in our brains and why we couldn't stop doing this. And they said it's more of a habit than a choice. But now it's even kind of gone beyond a habit, that it is an addiction. You know, I've been saying we were addicted to our phones for years, and people thought I was crazy and I was just too passionate. But we have the science to prove that that is true, that we literally are addicted. I mean, you look at youth, and they're sitting at a table hanging out with their friends, and they're all on their phones. They'll text each other when they're sitting right next to each other. My own kids did it. You know, they text for everything. It's how they communicate. They don't even look people in the eyes. So if you want to look more into this addiction, there was an episode of 60 Minutes called Brain Hacking. You can go online and watch it, and it's very interesting and eye-opening. And what it was, it takes these Silicon Valley insiders, people from Google, people from Facebook, and they talk about what they do to make you more addicted. Facebook and Instagram, they're using artificial intelligence and neuroscience, and they have algorithms built into their apps. So, for example, sometimes when you post something, you'll put it out there, and then you'll keep going back to check, you know, how many people liked my post? Did I get any comments? You know, what's everyone think about this? And you won't be getting any responses for a while. Well, what they have is in their algorithms, they hold your likes and comments. Because when you keep coming back, it's that element of surprise that gives us a bigger dopamine hit in our brain and addicts us more and wants us to keep coming back. And so then all of a sudden you come back, you've got 30 likes and 15 comments, and your brain gets this big hit, and it loves it. It enjoys it. And they design our phones and all of these apps to have these notifications, these pings, these bells and whistles, so we keep coming back. And I learned this because in the bottom picture, that's Ramsey Brown. He is one of these app developers. Although Ramsey is one of the good guys, he will not work with social media companies, with gambling, cash grab apps. He only works with financial well-being, wellness apps, things that will make you a better person. But he can guarantee, if you use his algorithms, that they can guarantee up to 167% increased screen time. If you would like to check out more information about what they do, if you go to boundless.ai, they even have a free ebook called Digital Behavior Design. It's about a 45-minute to an hour read, and it really goes in depth onto how they are using our own brains against us to addict us, so where we can't put this technology down. And Ramsey said, we've really just got to get to the point, do we want to be the people that we could become because of the influence of those we love and those we can look in the eye around us? Or do we want to become the person that Facebook or Instagram wants us to become with their targeted ads and their algorithms? And we really just have to decide that we want to be something different than what they're designing our brains to be. This is a real interesting story that came out in the New York Times. These same Silicon Valley developers, you know, the people who are behind Facebook and Google, they have put their kids in zero-tech schools because they know what this technology is doing to children's brains. They put them in no-tech schools. You know, my daughter's teacher, the one in elementary school, they always think I'm crazy because when they get into kindergarten, they're given an iPad to start learning. You know, they give them games to play, and when they get the answer right, they get all the celebrations and the explosions and the notifications and the dings. Well, that's building that dopamine stimulation in their brains. And so we are already training our children's brains when they're young to crave this, and that's why our kids can't get off the phone. You know, we've got to find a happy medium between that. These Silicon Valley people, some of them won't even let their kids have phones until they're a junior or senior in high school, and even then they put limitations on it, so they cannot use them but for an hour or two a day and only for school-related things. You know, this is a very dangerous technology that we've just let take hold of us. So this is some more science to back this up. Carnegie Mellon was doing it was the Mayo Clinic was doing some studies. They were doing studies on how, you know, epilepsy research, and they noticed they had found a new brain rhythm. It was discovered while people were texting. They've been able to go back and re-simulate this and they have named this the texting rhythm. So we have literally changed our brains and created a new brain rhythm because of this technology. So this is why it's getting worse. And one of the great things that we have now that we can see how bad it is telematics. If any of you aren't aware, telematics is where insurance companies are using this now for user-based insurance. So like a progressive snapshot is one type of this, and many companies put this on their drivers' phones as well as insurance companies to give you that user-based insurance. So what it is, you download an app on your phone, it stays on there for whatever period of time it's needed, and they see how you're driving. And through this app, it has algorithms set up that they can tell, are you the driver? Are you the passenger? Is the phone in a mount? Is it sitting in your lap? There's thousands of sensors in our cell phones now, so they can tell all of this information. And through this telematics, they're able to see what drivers are actually doing while they're driving. They show that 85% of drivers are distracted while they're driving. 1 out of 6 minutes, drivers are on the phone, and 71% of them are texting. TrueMotion is the company with that data. They're also able to tell, what hours of the day are we worse, what times of year. This is one thing that, during holidays, it's worse than we thought, probably because everybody wants to tell everyone, happy holidays, or so on and so forth. So we're using our phones more when we're driving, going from house to house, visiting family, going to see our friends. Another time it gets worse is in the summer when our kids are out of school, which is also the period of time they call the 100 deadliest days, because that's when the most traffic tragedies happen for our youth. And this telematics is giving us a bigger picture of that. I know this one's a little difficult to see, but it also tells us what the most distracted cities are, what the most distracted states. So we can see where we're having bigger problems in distraction. And you can see Chicago, Illinois is right there at number 8. So another company that has telematics information is called Zen Drive. They have an even bigger group of data for us to look at. Year over year, they do a snapshot of distracted driving, and they release the information in April. This started in 2017. They looked at this year in 2019, they looked at over 160 billion miles traveled by drivers. It was over 4 or 5 million drivers they looked at. And they were able to show overall distracted driving is 10 times worse than it was even in 2018. And 2018 was even worse than 2017. But they've come up with this new type of drivers that they're calling phone addicts. These are the super predators of distracted driving. These phone addicts spend 28% of their driving time actively ignoring the road. Do you know anyone that's a phone addict in your family? I mean, we all know someone that is always on their phone and can't put it down. Breaking that information down, if you're interested in checking out their study, you can go to the Zen Drive website. It's ZenDrive.com, I think is the address, or you just type in a search for Zen Drive's Distracted Driving Study. It's a free study you can download to really see what cities are the worst, what states are the worst, who are phone addicts, and also what are drivers doing. Getting into the phone addict data, the phone addicts have nearly doubled year over year. In 2018, only 4.6% of drivers were considered phone addicts. Now that is over 8%. They spend 1.5 more times on the road than the average driver. They drive 7.6 times more miles using their devices every day. They pick up their devices 4.3 times more than the average driver. And they spend 6 times more with their devices each time they touch it. These are truly phone addicts, and it's getting worse. And they project every year that this could double, and that's a dire situation on the more and more that becomes those phone addicts. They also added this year in 2019 a survey to these drivers on top of just using their telematics data. This was the first time for this. 85% of the drivers acknowledge distracted driving is a problem. but 90% also claim to be safe drivers, although 47% of those admitted to using their phones 10% or more of the time while driving, classifying them as those phone addicts. So, again, this is the part of, I guess, it's everyone else but me. I can do it, but everyone else is bad at it, when in actuality, no one can do this safely. There also came to the conclusion that phone addicts are the new drunk drivers, and it's worse than drunk driving now. One basis on this is, I grew up in Oklahoma and Texas, where in the 70s and 80s, when, people did drink and drive. That was just the way it was. But it was only late at night on weekends or holidays that you would see someone swerving and say, oh, that must be a drunk driver. Same conditions now, although we have done so much to change the stigma behind that. But with phone addicts, any time of day you drive, you will see someone on the phone, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., but yet even at, 5 a.m., you can drive around and you will see drivers on their phones. This is something that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is why it is a bigger threat than drunk driving at this time. This is a very difficult slide to show, but this is what ZenDrive had in their report. You can see the very light gray line at the bottom. That was the amount of distracted drivers in 2017 by hour, and 2018 is the blue line above that. Distracted driving has increased every hour of the day, and it's getting worse. So ZenDrive also has a great tool that if you go to zendrive.com/school, you can check and see how your child's school, your grandchild's school, see how the schools in your area are for distracted driving. This website, and you type in the school's address or the name, and it will pull it up, and it will give you a rating, A, B, C, D, F, just like grades in school. And it will tell you how that school ranks compared to the other schools for distracted driving. And then it will also even break down by hour, what hours are the worst. And sadly to say, it is during pickup and drop-off that these schools have the worst distracted drivers. So you could look at this information and take it to your schools in your community and let them know, hey, maybe we need to do some type of awareness to parents about how distracted they are when driving around our most precious cargo, our children, that maybe they should be off their phones. A lot of states also do have, no cell phone use in school zones, and so putting campaigns around that could make a big difference. This is some data from ZenDrive that just has a few interesting points from 2018 study. The biggest thing that stuck out to me is that drivers with iPhones use their phones nearly twice as much than drivers with Android phones. I do have an iPhone, and I do love my iPhone, although I don't use it behind the wheel. But I think it's because, the iPhone is built more with those design features to addict us. And so that's something else to remember is, when we're behind the wheel, just because our phone is convenient or calling us, maybe we should ignore it. Another thing they came out with was drivers, even though it may seem like 4 minutes of the drive isn't much that they're on the phone, but within that 4 minutes, it can be dangerous. And they also found that most of the distracted driving was happening within the first 5 minutes of the drive. So centering campaigns or reminding people, hey, why don't you send that text, make those calls, do those things before you drive away, before you get into the car, and then you'll be less tempted. Now, I've also just released a story within the last week or two. It was a survey they just did, and they surveyed normal drivers and what they think is the biggest threat on the road. All the people in their survey, 55% of the people in their survey said that driving distracted is now the biggest threat on the road, surpassing driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, aggressive driving, or even speeding. So we all know that driving distracted, you can look around at any time and see that. And then also the culprits aren't who you think. A lot of people like to blame the youth for driving while they're, distracted, but it's not just them. Actually, with all the awareness efforts and safety efforts being centered around the children, they get it and it's working. And it's more the older drivers now that are becoming the problem. In fact, parents with children under 18 are the most likely to use their phones while driving, whether they're at a stoplight, driving alone, or driving with a passenger. Even more surprising, though, is driving with their kids in the car. 62% of them compared to 38% overall. And for some, this is not only infrequent. You know, 1/3, 32% admit they use their phone while driving with their kids. We've got to think of the example that we're setting for our children, and that we are showing them that this is okay for them to do while driving. So, you know, I always tell people, your child starts to learn how to drive when you change them from rear-facing to forward-facing. And they're watching you. They're watching what you're doing. They're watching how you're driving. And so we need to be conscious of what we're doing in that example we're setting. You know, I was notified by someone when we were working on a hands-free law in Colorado. A journalist called me and said that a Denver city councilman had just posted a video on Twitter, and he wanted me to take a look and give him a comment. And it was a road safety partner with the organizations. You know, he supported all the road safety efforts, and he was one of the champions. But on Twitter, he posted a live video where he had his phone mounted and started to take a video. He was parked. So I thought, well, at least he's not driving. But as he's doing this live video, he starts to drive. In the passenger seat next to him was his daughter. And then he's talking to the camera, talking to his daughter, having her chime in on the video and talk. This was a horrible example he was setting for his daughter to see that it is okay to live stream a video while you're driving. So again, we just have to set better examples. So what we're doing to change this behavior, you know, education and awareness, you see it everywhere, you hear it everywhere. There's commercials on TV, you hear it on the radio, people speak up. But the criminal justice system is starting to catch up. There are criminal punishments now being instituted for these punishments, varying from state to state. In the beginning, people were getting a slap on the wrist and, oh, this was just an accident. They didn't mean to. But things are starting to get beefed up because people are tired of losing the ones they love. You're seeing people go to prison for anywhere from 1 to 20 years. In Iowa, there was a case where a 18-year-old driver went left of center, hit another car head-on because she was texting. 4- and 5-year-old little boys were killed. She was sentenced to a 10-year sentence in prison for those deaths. If the prison system doesn't do justice for the family, they can then look at civil liability. Texas A&M, this was a state that didn't even have any distracted driving laws at the time. We just got a no texting law enacted in 2017, but the courts did still find liability, which always made Texas an interesting case. But in 2007, a Texas A&M student was ordered to pay a $21.825 million lawsuit when his phone records indicated he had sent and received 15 text messages and made 7 calls in the 45 minutes prior to the fatal crash. You are seeing these cases more and more. There's also civil liability for companies. Coca-Cola actually had a driver who was talking hands-free, which was their company policy that allowed hands-free. Again, this case was even in Texas, where there were no state laws, even for texting at the time. But the courts did find Coca-Cola liable in a $21 million lawsuit because they said that it was Coca-Cola's responsibility to let their drivers know that even hands-free was not risk-free and that they should have had a better policy restricting their employees from being on the phone at all in order to protect the ones on the road. Now, a very innovative yet controversial law or precedent that has been set is to hold the person texting liable. This was first tried in a New Jersey court system where a couple was riding on a motorcycle and they were hit by a driver who was texting his girlfriend at the time. They both lost a leg. They did not win this case, although it did still set a precedent. The driver, and what they found was if a person is texting a driver They can be sitting at home on their couch, and if they're texting a driver and they can prove that they knew the driver was driving and they continued to text them, then they can also be held liable. This precedent was held up by the Supreme Court and has been tried in numerous other states to date. And so it's something to think about. If you do know someone is driving, don't text them. You don't want to be responsible for them not being able to ignore that notification and responding to you and causing a crash and taking someone's life or their own. So I'm going to, I don't think this video will show. I can get this video over. This was just a video of Christopher, who was actually the one that took my mother's life, just to see from his perspective. Christopher, he basically says in this video that as soon as it happened, he knew what had happened. He knew he had took her life, and that all that continues to go through his mind is just hitting her and knowing he took her life over something as simple as a phone call. He wasn't having an emotional conversation. He wasn't doing anything serious. Like I said, he'd only been on the phone for less than a minute and driving less than a quarter of a mile. He was actually on the phone with his neighbor, who he had just seen a nice dresser at the Goodwill store that he thought would be good for them. And he was talking to their 12-year-old son to let them know about that. When it distracted him so much, he never saw the light or my mom's car. So what can we all do to be a more focused driver? The number one thing is we have to lead by example. It starts with us. We have to be an example to anyone that is in the car with us, to anyone around us. We have to be off the phone and show that life can still go on when you're not on the phone. I never use my phone when I'm driving, hands-free, handheld, ever. And I'm more busy now than I've ever been and do more now than I ever did. Life can go on and we can do more. So you need to get off the phone, take a pledge, but live up to it every day. No, you need to recommit to that every day. In order to break the habit and get used to it, turn off your ringer or put it on silent when you get behind the wheel so you don't have those notifications tempting you, those pings. Your brain will automatically go to reach for that phone. Many people, after a new law passes, they get pulled over and they tell the police, oh, I never knew, I didn't realize I was doing it. They're serious. They didn't. Their brain, it was an automatic reaction. There's a lot of great apps out there you can download that will hold your calls and text messages and send automatic responses. Actually, every phone that you buy now has one of these apps already installed on it. If you have AT&T, it's called Drive Mode. With Verizon, Sprint, the other ones, I think it's Safely Go. But if you turn these on, they'll help break your habit. If you have an iPhone, you have Do Not Disturb, where that comes in the operating system. You just have to enable it. And what will happen is when someone calls or texts you, they will get an automatic reply that says, I'm sorry, so-and-so is driving. They'll call you back when it's safe. You can customize this message. You can also flag so certain, like a call from your children or your husband or your boss can get through. But these are a great tool, again, to stop those notifications and that temptation. If you're driving with someone and you need to take an important call or send a message, have that designated texter. Have someone do it for you. You can also change your voicemail. I know we live in a time when everyone wants us to be available 24/7. When you call me, you get a voicemail that says, hi, you've reached Jennifer Smith with StopDistractions.org. I'm either unavailable or I'm driving. So leave a message, and I'll call you back when it's safe. It is amazing how much that voicemail works in multiple ways. One, it spreads the safety message that people shouldn't use their phone while driving, but also it makes people say, oh, okay, maybe she's busy, and they don't expect you to be available 24/7. What more can you do? Again, lead by example and practice what you preach. Every time we go and speak to children and at high schools, the biggest thing they do is raise their hands and say, okay, we get it, but how do we get our parents to stop? They're scared. They don't want you doing this in the car when they're driving. So give them that authority to remind you to be a safe driver. Start educating your kids early. Who's the biggest police officer when you don't put your seatbelt on? It's that little three-year-old in the back seat screaming, put your seatbelt on. Well, we need to do that with our children now. The younger, the better. Also, make it a family affair. If you have teens, all of your children, make a pact. Sign that pledge together and hold each other accountable. Make contests out of it. See who can drive the least distracted. That will help you make sure that you stick to it every day, because I promise you it is a hard habit to break. Spread the message, influence others, and speak up. If you're in the car with someone who is driving distracted, ask them to stop. Ask them if they could please wait until you're safe. And if they don't stop, ask them to let you out of the car. We've got to be that serious. You don't want to be the passenger in a car when they crash because you didn't say anything. Don't call others when you know they're driving. That's one thing that if someone leaves your house and they forgot something, if you call them, they're going to answer. You don't want to be on the other end of that phone. I know so many parents who actually were the ones who are on the phone with their children when they crashed, and that's not something you want to walk around with that guilt. Another thing we can do is try to retrain your brain. So how you do this is try to take notice of what it is that's making you reach for the phone when you're driving. And take note of what those moments are. Is it when traffic slows, the traffic gets congested? Is it when a notification or a call comes in? What is it because you're just simply bored? What are those cues that are making you reach for your phone? And then try to retrain your brain. So when you notice that cue happens, instead of reaching for the phone, when that trigger happens, condition yourself to adjust your mirrors. Look at the speedometer. Do something to make your brain remember, I'm driving. This is what I need to focus on. And know that it's going to take time. It's persistence. And it's, like I said, we're up against our brains, so this is a hard habit to break. There's also a great app. This is from the guy at Boundless Mind that I talked about, Ramsey Brown. If you go to youjustneedspace.com online, he has a free app that you can download onto your phone, and you can put this over your social media or whatever apps that you're always on. You download it on that, and then it overlays. So, for instance, say you put it on Instagram because you have a problem with being on Instagram too much, or Facebook. So then when you get the urge to go on to Facebook or Instagram, when you click on the icon, which will just be the space icon over the Facebook or Instagram, what it will do is it will take you to this screen of, like you see on that phone below, where it says breathe with me. And it's going to make you stop and take a breath. And that circle will move in and out. And based on how many times you've been on it and how much you've been, showing your addiction that day, it's going to make you breathe longer. And what it's doing is it's short-circuiting that dopamine. It's stopping that cycle to make you stop, take a breath. And when you're breathing, your brain's going to think about what you're doing, and that instant gratification is going to be slowed, and it can help break that habit that you have. Other things you can do, you can turn your phone to grayscale. Turn down to warmer colors in the evening when you want to, slow this down. Turning it to grayscale gets those pings and notifications and all the alerts that you get, it tones them down into a different way that doesn't attract our brain and addict it so much. So more things that are being done, laws. If you've noticed, a lot of states are passing hands-free laws. Now, with these laws, we are not saying that hands-free is any safer, but what it's doing is it's making the distracted driving laws enforceable. The current texting laws are very unenforceable because you can't tell if a person's texting, if they're dialing, if they're just using GPS, or what they're doing. We are currently at 18 states plus D.C. with hands-free laws, and just as this morning, the Tennessee House and Senate have passed a hands-free law and have sent it to the governor. We have more states in the work this year. So you're going to see these laws changing, and the big thing is because constituents are demanding it. And the good news is these laws are working. This is recently out of Georgia. We worked for about 8 months with a lot of pressure to work on Georgia passing a hands-free law. This had about 35 families who had lost loved ones actively engaged. Georgia seen a 34% increase in fatalities from 2014 to 2017. Now they have passed a hands-free law. They have reduced their fatal crashes. They have reduced their commercial vehicle fatal crashes. They have improved driver commute times because people aren't sitting at red lights using their phones. Insurance crash claim frequency and severity has also gone down. They had seen a 12.6% increase in insurance rates, and now many of those insurance rates have stabilized. Some companies have even lowered their rates in that state 2.5%. And how do we know it's the hands-free law that's doing this? One, it was the only law that we passed that has changed in the state. And also, we went and got that telematics data. And the telematics data shows that on July 1st, when that law went into effect, drivers were typing and swiping on their phones 22% less, and that has continued to trend downward. And this is that information from TrueMotion Telematics. You can see as of just a little before July, you saw a drastic decrease in cell phone use of typing and swiping, where it's continued to go down. And that is why there are less fatal crashes and injury crashes and lives are being saved. One thing that just came out on Friday out of Georgia, Cherokee County Sheriff just put out some numbers showing that, and he's directly saying it's because of the hands-free law. In 2017, before the law, they investigated 34 crashes, fatal crashes in Cherokee County. In 2018, with the law going into effect July 1st, they investigated 18 fatal crashes that entire year. This year, in 2019, there has only been one fatal crash in Cherokee County. Like I said, these laws will work. Also, Oro Valley, Arizona is another city where they passed a hands-free city ordinance because the state refused to act for 13 legislative sessions. They didn't even have a no texting law. Oro Valley averaged about 3 to 4 fatalities a year. It's a small community. Ever since they have been enforcing their hands-free city ordinances, that's about 2.5 years, there have been 0 fatal crashes in the city of Oro Valley, Arizona. And I'm excited to say Arizona, just last week, the governor signed into law a hands-free law in the state of Arizona, completely bypassing texting. Arizona became the 18th state to go hands-free. So there's many PSAs and different things you can use if you want to show your teens. This is just one of them that was done out of North Carolina. In this one, these teens were talking about how they're addicted. They can't stop using their phones, and they don't know why. They want to stop. They know it's dangerous. Travelers Insurance also did a documentary. It's about an hour long. They did it with PBS. If you go to 3seconds.org, you can watch this video. You use the code TRAVELERS to download it for free, or it's even on Amazon Prime, and it's called 3 Seconds Behind the Wheel. What they did is they put cameras in cars with 8 people to see what they were really doing behind the wheel. And I'm not saying the cell phone is the only distraction. People are doing many things behind the wheel, as you see in that documentary, but the cell phone is the most prevalent. One of the kids in this film even said, I would never text and drive. I lost a friend in high school because of that. I would never do it. But the entire time he was driving, he was on Instagram. And so that's why I say we've got to get away from the word texting, and that we have got to, just get back to the fact that we're driving. So you can look those up in all kinds of ways, or watch that PBS documentary, 3 Seconds. Many of you also probably could have seen that Geico's running a new cause campaign ads that I've seen on TV a few times now, or you can go online and look it up at Geico Smart Dogs. And, people, they basically saying this, people won't listen to people anymore, so maybe we'll listen to our dogs because we all love our dogs so much. And it's basically, these smart dogs are trained to get people off their phones. And at the end they say, listen, these smart dogs, they aren't real. They're not coming. But there are things you can do. And if you go on this website, it actually will help you, give you directions on how to turn on Do Not Disturb on whatever type of phone you have. You can watch the ad, and then at the bottom it has a link for the iPhone, for the Google Pixel, and the Android for the Do Not Disturb features that you can download on your phone to make it so you don't drive distracted, and you stop those notifications, and it really helps. Here's my contact information. If anyone has any questions or wants to follow along with our efforts, we need all the help we can get. You know, this is a problem like we've never seen before. If you know anyone that has lost someone or been impacted, let them know to contact us and get in contact. We love to connect people with others who have experienced the same thing, to be that shoulder to cry on, but also to help bring change. Getting out and sharing our stories, making this real, is how we change it. We are up against a monster with distracted driving, but we really can prevent it.